there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
I'm Matthew.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters, presented by 3 self-certified TEFLologists.
TEFL News.
For today's TEFL News, I've got a story here from EL Gazette. The headline is rather self-explanatory. China recruits 2,000 Filipino teachers. It is self-explanatory, but is it? That's what I want to talk about today. So I'm going to read this entire article, which is about 8 words long. Philippines Labour Chief Silvestre Bello has announced a government-to-government hiring scheme with China, where a minimum of 2,000 Filipino teachers will start work this autumn. That's pretty much it.
Okay.
So I have 2 questions to begin with. Why are they doing this? And is it a good thing or a bad thing? So what do you guys think? Why are they doing this? What would you guess?
I spoke to somebody recently who works in university in Beijing, and he talked about the huge demand at the moment for English teachers. Apparently, it's just a really big demand, and they're aware that they won't be able to meet that demand. He made it sound like it would be relatively easy to get a pretty good university job there at the moment.
Okay.
In Beijing, at least.
Nice.
But presumably that's part of it. There's just a very high demand for English language teachers at the moment.
Okay.
I think naturally, maybe I'd say, demand is high. They're going to undercut and pay people less. And getting teachers from the Philippines would mean that they'd pay cheaper wages, perhaps. Although I don't want that to be the truth, but that's what I'm inclined to say.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of it happening in Japan too, of Filipino teachers being hired, often for video lessons and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, and do you think this is a positive or a negative thing?
In terms of thinking about, the whole moves towards, non-native speaker teacher representations, it's a positive thing. And maybe in terms of world Englishes, it's also a positive thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I maybe, as you said also though, if it means that they're looking for cheap labor, then maybe there could be some negative aspects to it too.
Right. So you've touched on several points that I wanted to bring up. What I've got here are 2 articles. One from the Global Times, which is a news outlet that I've never heard of until now, but I'm assuming this is accurate, and the South China Morning Post. And they paint 2 different pictures of this event. So, first of all, the Global Times article really focuses on the teaching side of things. So they highlight stories from different Filipino teachers, saying that if they go and work in China, they get a good salary, a higher standard of living than they would get elsewhere. They say that they have an advantage over other people because they come from what they call an English-speaking country. So the Filipino teachers see themselves as coming from an English-speaking country, which I think we do as well. And actually one of them is quoted as saying that they are even better than some Americans because we strictly follow grammar.
Okay.
And they also mention, as you guys were talking about, discrimination that they've experienced in the past based on skin colour and nationality, which might soon be gone as a result of this.
Okay.
However, in the same article, they touch on a few different, more troubling points. The first one is, as you were saying, Matt, about price. So, for example, they quote the CEO of a company called 51 Talk, who organised Skype lessons, I guess, with Filipino teachers, and said that Filipino teachers were less expensive hires than American or British teachers, and we're a good online English tutoring resource. I think the wording there is
Yeah, what does that
interesting.
imply? Does that imply some sort of hierarchy? And that if you're British, you get paid more?
I think, well, yes.
That kind of seems what it's saying.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the case.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's in that sense, that's a bit worrying that they're thinking, well, we can't afford to pay for prestige teachers of English, but we can get loads more in at a cheaper price.
Right,
So
right.
it's a win-win.
Yeah, so
I don't want that to be true. So that's, I don't know.
Presumably, it's catering for different markets. So students who can afford, who pay more for the lessons may get a teacher from England or America, and students who want to pay for cheaper classes may end up with a Filipino teacher.
right.
Yeah, but
Which,
that's not right, though, is it? Still.
No, of course not. Of course
Yeah.
not. You would hope that anybody of any nationality, based on their experience and ideally quality as a teacher, would be charging
Yeah.
you do want, I don't know. I don't think there's anything. Well, we've talked about this before. Maybe there is something wrong with it, but having cheap lessons available to people, and if that's all they can afford, having that market there, maybe in itself isn't a problem.
I think
it may be.
it's good in a way. 'Cause
Yeah.
you get just as good or better lessons if the teachers are qualified.
You mean for the consumer?
Yes,
Right,
yeah.
right. Yeah.
From a very neoliberal point of view, it's
Good. Sure.
So another point that's brought up here is that although these teachers view themselves as having an advantage because they come from an English-speaking country, China has yet to assign them native speaker status. It's interesting.
Do they have to?
Well, I guess they do for like visa reasons and so on. I guess that would be a reason that... I mean, I'm not sure exactly what it means to assign them native speaker status, but I guess it means for visa reasons or something like that.
I wonder if the article's mixing ideology there with, like you say, visa stuff. I don't know. It's hard to know what they mean by that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's commenting on something that China hasn't done yet.
Right.
So I guess this is something official in the language of Chinese bureaucracy, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
But yeah, so there is a long note at the end of the article about how Chinese people may be sceptical of these teachers or unwilling to accept them. So this article really focused...
Until they see the price.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So this article focused on the teaching angle, and obviously there's some pluses and minuses for the teachers, how they're perceived, maybe they get more opportunities.
Yeah.
However, there was another article in the South China Morning Post which focused on a more political angle to the story. So they said that this is perhaps not quite such a positive thing in a lot of ways. They said that this is a new trend, the Chinese government looking for Filipino English teachers. And until recently, they'd barely had any Chinese clients. The companies that supplied teachers overseas had barely had any Chinese clients. And this is actually because of a change in attitude on the part of the Chinese government. And in particular, what they want to do is closen their ties with the Philippines. And this is seen as a good faith measure to bring that about. So the Philippine embassy frames it in this way. They say, it's an important step to further promote people-to-people exchanges and understanding between the two countries. It's also a recognition of the world-class talent and excellent qualifications as Filipinos as teachers and educators. So obviously that's a very positive spin. However, they also quote a professor of political science at Lingnan University in Hong Kong, who says, China is mainly motivated by political reasons. China wants to use all means available to show Duterte that a cooperative relationship with China... sorry, it's cut off the page there. I can't do it. But yeah, basically they're trying to show that they want a cooperative relationship. And the same professor continues to say that China's worst case scenario is that every country in the region will lean towards the US-Japan alliance. And so to stop that, in this case, they're pouring a lot of money into business relationships and partnerships with the Philippine government in order to shore up their relationship, to stop them becoming close to relations with perhaps countries that they might see as more antagonistic.
Okay.
So from that point of view, this move to bring in these 2,000 teachers is actually perhaps part of a more cynical political, machination.
Yeah, I mean, I get focusing on the angle of challenging the U.S. Japan dominance. That is one angle I guess you could take, but you could also just view it as they want to develop better business and working relationships with the Philippines.
Right.
Strengthen that relationship.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is how the different stories frame it in different ways, and how the EL Gazette focused on they're just bringing in a bunch of teachers, but when you get into these longer articles, you can see the politics behind it, and I think it's a very good illustration of the way that politics and global politics and international relations is tied in with the business of language teaching in a way that maybe we don't always realise or recognise. So I'm sure there'll be more about this coming out in the future, but this was just a quick discussion on the story about 2,000 Filipino English teachers being hired in China. And that's this episode's TEFL News.
TEFL Pioneers.
Okay, so for this week's TEFL Pioneer, I won't say her name yet, but by way of introduction, so I was reading Scott Thornbury's A to Z of ELT, A to Z.
Which edition?
It's his online blog.
Okay.
I don't think. Yeah. Anyway.
Which edition?
Is there
He
one?
did. Yeah, he stopped it. It went on hiatus for a while.
Okay.
And went back to it.
Yeah, I think this is one of the older
Okay.
entries. But Scott describes his attempts to find historical female figures in ELT. So Scott talks of reading Stern's Fundamental Concepts of Language Teaching and Howitt's A History of English Language Teaching.
They're both on the shelf there.
Yeah, and we talked about both of them before, I think. And he said that he didn't find... I don't really agree with this. He said not finding any that were responsible for designing a method. As if designing a method should be the only thing that would make them important in any way.
As if Lozanov is the most in contrast to Wilga Rivers or something.
I don't think he means that you have to have a method in order to be considered historically important. But I think in terms of Stern's book especially, that's how he kind of organises the book. I think. So, in that case, but he talks about Wilga Rivers, who we've also talked about before in episode
something.
I don't know, I can't remember. But I think Rob, you talked about her.
Yes. Yeah.
Being the first name that he came across, and he basically said that in 100 years of history, documented history in these books, there are only 2 female figures in the LT of note according to these books. And the second one is Sandra Savignon. Was my pronunciation good there, Matt? Savignon?
Excellent.
So I thought we'd talk about her today, talk about her contribution.
Yeah. Okay.
A main contribution. So a bit of background first. So according to her personal website, Sandra is currently a Professor Emerita.
Sure.
She uses the term emerita. I think it's a female version of.
It sounds plural rather than singular.
Yeah, but it's usually emeritus.
Yeah.
Professor
Well, I
emeritus.
checked, and apparently it's a female version of emeritus.
Oh.
Emerita.
Doesn't sound right. But
Sure.
okay.
Whatever.
But she holds 2 positions, so I could be wrong. It could be. So she's French and English as an international language at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign.
Sure.
Is that right?
Yeah.
How many times have I asked that already today? Is that right? But that's where Braj Kashroo formerly worked as well. And she's also Professor Emerita of Applied Linguistics at Penn State University as well. Interestingly, perhaps, she received her BA, MA and PhD all at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign too.
I think that was quite common back in the day. People would do their PhD somewhere and then stay there, they'd get hired onto the faculty. It's less common these days, where you're meant to go to 11 different places to get your degrees and then a final other place.
Yep.
In the mountains to work.
And then never return to where you did.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about her sort of academic background, but her contributions to our industry, our field, I guess, is she's best known for her work in communicative competence.
Yep.
And in fact, earlier this year, she wrote a chapter on the area for the TESOL Encyclopedia of English Language Teaching. Came out this year, apparently, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, our colleague Marek Kichkowiak, I think, has an entry in that.
Oh, right, okay. They're quite short entries. They're only about kind of 10 pages long, but they just kind of go through all the key concepts,
Yeah.
obviously. But yeah, it's, and she also wrote a state-of-the-art article on CLT in 1991 that's quite widely cited as well. So, firstly, what are your understandings of communicative competence?
Well, so as it happens, Savignon was the PhD supervisor of my MA supervisor.
Okay, right, I see.
And
6 degrees of Savignon.
yeah. And he, on my MA course, we read a lot of Savignon and we talked a lot about her ideas.
Good.
And he basically, as one of his MA students, we all had to memorize and be able to, immediately quote back Savignon's definition of communication.
Okay.
So she was, I think a key figure in the idea of CLT, of a communicative approach.
Yeah.
But then obviously, made the key steps of going back and talking about, okay, we've decided communication is an important thing, outcome and sort of process in language learning for our students. But what does communication mean?
Yeah.
So her definition of communication is the expression, interpretation, and negotiation of meaning.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I think came up actually when we were talking about the negotiation for meaning. A few
Right,
episodes
yeah,
ago.
I think it did, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's today's TEFL.
So then communicative competence, very broadly speaking, is your competence in being able to do those three things.
Right, yeah. So I've got a quote from Douglas Brown about communicative competence. It's a cluster of abilities that enable humans to convey and interpret messages and to negotiate meanings interpersonally within specific contexts.
Yep.
Does that kind of fit in?
Yeah, so convey instead of express meaning.
Right,
Otherwise,
right.
Convey, interpret, and negotiate meaning.
Okay, yeah. So one work in particular is her 1972 experiments. This is kind of considered as a pivotal moment in the development or kind of inclinations towards communicative methods. Savignon herself talks of the dominance of the audiolingual behaviourist methods in the 50s and the 60s. I think I saw it termed earlier today as the army methods.
Yeah. U.S. Army.
Very behaviourist, drilling, that kind of thing. So part of her work at the time was all about kind of moving away from that, or kind of trying to form active experiments that prove otherwise, that that's a good way of doing things, basically. She credits Noam Chomsky and Dale Hymes with changing these methods. I think Dale Hymes was the first person to come up with the term communicative competence, but she kind of adapted it slightly, or kind of developed it a bit more.
Right.
Yeah.
So Savignon talks of her discouragement in the 1960s of her learners' repeated failure to use structures and vocabulary they had rehearsed when offered opportunities for spontaneous interaction.
Yeah. Yes, I think she had experience teaching with those previous methods and found them insufficient. I guess.
Wanting.
I was going to say wanting.
Yeah. So the 1972 project, this took place at the end of an 18-week course that she was working on and observing, researching at the same time. Her findings at the end of this 18-week course were that learners in the experimental group who had engaged in unscripted classroom communication in place of laboratory drills to reinforce patterns, far excelled learners in the control group in their ability to use French in a variety of unscripted communicative tasks.
Okay.
So she was looking at French language, I guess, not English.
Yeah. Well, you're allowed to do that.
You're allowed to do that. It's fine. It's all
It's
good.
fine.
It's all good. It's all good. She also found that they demonstrated a grammatical accuracy equal to those who had spent time repeating patterns in a language lab.
So I think that's a maybe interesting point about her development of communicative approach, which I think gets kind of forgotten now, which is that there is, and this kind of comes back to the focus on form thing, is that there is, the communicative approach can still address grammar and that side of that's a component of communicative competence.
Definitely, yeah. And I think there were others that kind of came after her in sort of the late 70s, early 80s. I think Merrill Swain was one of them that talked about strategic competence, grammatical competence, and sociolinguistic competence
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
And then went on to break it down into even further categories.
Right. So this was all kind of leading up to the CLT paradigm, I guess. Kind of trying to get it into its place, I guess, ready for the next 20 or 30 years or so.
Ready for us to come along.
Ready for us guys, coming in. Anyway, so that's probably all I have time for today. But I think one of her other contributions was that she, and this kind of goes back to Scott Thornberry's blog earlier on, was that she wrote an article called Gender and Power in Applied Linguistics, an Epistemological Challenge in 2006. I read it earlier today. It's a challenging article to fully understand, but also Deborah Cameron wrote a counterpoint piece as well, kind of taking aim at her stance, basically. I think that's a whole other episode in itself. But I think this is another one of her contributions, I say, kind of raising awareness of feminist issues amongst scholars in applied linguistics.
Yeah, I think maybe a future episode where we get in a guest, so it's not just three guys talking about.
Yeah, I'm aware of that a lot. Yeah. So anyway, that's very briefly, that's today's TEFL pioneer, Sandra Savignon.
TEFL cultures.
So for this episode's TEFL culture, I'm going to talk about fun in the classroom.
Okay.
Okay?
Have you ever had any?
Well, we can talk about fun for the teacher, but mainly talking about fun for the students. So my first question for you as a kind of introduction is, have you ever, or do you ever kind of make a conscious decision to try to create a fun activity or add an element of fun to an activity or a lesson?
No.
I feel like I'm quite serious when I'm teaching. Like, I don't know, I feel like I'm naturally inclined to be like I want them to develop my students and stuff, and I want them to have fun, but I'd say I'm more on the side of being quite serious. And
Okay, but you said you do want them to have fun.
I do want them to have fun, but I don't, and I would encourage that in the activity, but maybe I don't come across as a fun person.
Okay.
I think I'm always kind of have a serious mask on.
What are some ways that you might sort of add this extra layer of fun?
A bit. Well, I don't know. I've been told that I don't smile much when in life.
But in terms of, I don't know, how you design an activity or how you set it up or how you get the students to do it.
Maybe the topics, perhaps. Maybe the modality, the physicality of the activity.
Okay.
Getting them walking around, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I try and I try and do it subtly. I think so. Like, for example, where in my materials, I put in like little jokes, like someone expressing an opinion, which is it's sort of fine, but like it's a sort of subtly ridiculous opinion.
Yeah.
And then when the students realise that, they all laugh. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I like to do that, and I like to make jokes myself, but I don't like to play games or things where the students feel like, because we're all teaching in universities. There's a sort of an expectation that you're studying in a certain mode, I think.
Yeah.
So I don't like do overtly fun things, but of course try and put fun into the activities in some way, in a way that they can appreciate. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'd go out of my way to kind of say the aim of this activity is. I think I'd try and make that a bit more clear if it could be perceived that we're just frolicking around.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know. Because like Rob said,
I guess maybe the one thing to kind of tease out, there's maybe a distinction between, this idea of play, which I think does have maybe sort of some pedagogical value,
right,
in terms of how students interact with something, and this idea of fun. What do you think are the advantages of bringing fun to the classroom?
Fun is good.
Okay.
I think that any kind of learning can become a bit of a drag, even if you're interested in it. If you've been sitting in a room for 60 minutes doing language study, even if you're interested in it, it can be a bit of a drag. And I think adding something that's a little bit fun in there just lightens the mood, gets people interested.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they're still using the language.
Yeah.
But they're probably using it in a less cognitively demanding way, perhaps, argument, maybe not. I think a lot of people disagree with that. I think play and fun is still quite cognitively challenging, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But everyone's definition of fun is different, though, as well.
Right.
Yeah, look at our definition of fun, like a TEFL podcast. I guess it also helps in terms of group dynamics in the classroom, like bringing in an element of fun can, you know, get the students to enjoy each other's company a bit more.
Okay. So I guess the idea here is that it's sort of motivating. It makes students sort of look forward to coming to the class. It puts them in the right sort of, I don't know, mind space where they're ready to get to engage in an activity. Do you think students, and maybe I'm talking more about adult students here,
right?
Maybe it's quite a separate issue for younger learners.
Right, yeah, of course, yeah.
Do adult students, do you think they really want fun in the ELT classroom?
Depends on the student, like everything else. Like as a language learner myself, I don't particularly like, I mean, for me, the fun comes from the interaction. It comes from the conversation. Yeah. Like obviously, if the teacher's just explaining something in excessive detail then that's not fun, right? But I also don't like it when it's a bit too fun. You know, I feel like I'm being talked down to a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, it should be natural fun rather than like staged fun, perhaps. I don't know, like if as a teacher, if naturally a fun person, it kind of comes across a bit weird if you try and have
forced
fun.
Yeah, forced fun.
I don't know. Well, I haven't said that though. Like a lot of when I taught some business learners, like I think they come to class to kind of relax from their daily grind. Yeah, so maybe they want to do something a bit different that they're not used to. Usually do.
So one thing that got me sort of thinking about this topic was a plenary talk at this year's Innovate ELT conference, which was in Oxford, I think, in May of this year. And there's a plenary given by Sarah Priestley. And the name of the talk was, "Do Students Really Want Fun in the ELT Classroom?" She basically kind of argues against fun in the classroom. But I mean, I'll talk a little bit about what she means exactly by that. So, well, one of her first issues is, I think, the overrepresentation, if that makes sense, of fun in language teaching. So if you look for materials for language teaching, I think what she did is she just Googled, language teaching activities, and was surprised by how many, you get a lot of hits for that sort of thing. Obviously, it's all sorts of websites, but how many of them made a point of saying this is a fun activity? Do you think there's an issue with that?
Yeah. Do you think this maybe ties in with the assumption that some people have that, like conversation teachers are somehow not real teachers?
I think Dan Holley-Nagatomo calls it the eigo versus eikai
Yeah,
distinction.
in Japan there's a distinction between conversation teachers and then all other teachers.
Serious stuff.
And maybe these kind of activities support that stereotype that we're just having fun, we're just using our language and
Where do we draw the line between fun and interesting? In Japanese there's one word, omoshiroi, which means both, right? It means fun and it doesn't mean both. It means fun and interesting. Because I got feedback from my students recently on my British culture course, where we covered lots of quite complex issues, I think. And the feedback that I got was, I really enjoyed this course. It was really interesting, rather than it was really fun. And that is an important distinction to me, I think, because enjoying something doesn't necessarily mean that it's fun. But it depends what you call fun. I mean, I find interesting things fun. I don't necessarily find fun things interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And it could even translate as funny in some cases.
Right.
Yeah. It's a whole other thing. I think in Japan maybe there is that distinction, but I think even in general, you can find a lot of activities like fun activities to practice the present perfect, or grammar games and all those sort of resource books.
Yeah.
So in that sense, are they talking more about the topics or
the topics, but also turning an activity into a game with the understanding that it's going to be fun. That sort of thing.
I'm not a big fan of that, to be honest. I just think when you're learning a bit of grammar to express something or to engage with people in some way, and turning it into a game makes it very artificial, and it's almost like behaviorist. It's like repeat the same grammar structure over and over again. With this game as the framework that you're doing it within.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very important thing when you do look at those activities. Then I think in theory it's possible to have a good activity that's framed as a game, perhaps. But like you said, for the most part, they're actually, the overriding goal should be, I don't know, meaningful practice of whatever this is, or learning something new. And sometimes it seems like the fun aspect is put ahead of that.
Yeah, I guess if you were doing a game like Monopoly, and just doing it in your second language, that would actually be a really good way to learn, because a lot of useful everyday language and stuff.
So she kind of challenges a couple of assumptions. One is that students need to have fun in order to learn, which I think probably we agree is not true, especially this idea of need. But I think part of her problem is that a lot of these materials are used by kind of new teachers or relatively experienced teachers, so they may get that impression that fun is a necessary component of the classroom, which is one thing she wants to challenge. The other thing she wants to challenge is that students themselves actually want fun in the classroom, and I guess here we're talking about sort of the more I don't know, fun side rather than just the interesting side. I mean, she claims that she's never, and I think maybe it sounds true, that she's never had a student come up to her after class and say, this course is going great, but I was just wondering if we could have a bit more fun. You know what I mean? They might ask for specific structures or do more reading or that kind of thing. So
I heard one teacher, I can't remember who it was, say, my classes are all about fun. I want to have a fun time with my students. Like a lot of them don't want to be there, so I just want to make it fun. And,
I've seen some people use fun almost as like they're tricking the students. My students are having fun, but they're really doing this. Do you know what I mean? And that feels a bit dishonest.
Right.
So in thinking about fun, I think you have to have a kind of a plan of how this fun is going to be used for. I don't know. I still get the feeling that some teachers aren't aware of the students' language development and how to construct activities that would what's the word, bring out that development. I think they're just saying, oh, that's a fun activity, they'll like that, I'll just do that, and they're not really thinking, well, hang on, that might not lead to anything. So I think you've got to kind of maneuver fun in that sort of way.
So I think what we're saying is that the focus should be on the language learning, and that if some kind of element of fun can be included to help motivate the students, that's great. Sarah Priestley, her main point in the end is that what she's observed is that the students they need to be challenged, they need to be engaged. Obviously, they need to find things interesting to stay motivated. But not necessarily just have fun. Okay, well that is this episode's TEFL culture, fun in the classroom.
Thank you very much for listening.
And if you'd like to get in contact with us, you can email us at teflology@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter @TEFLology. You can like our Facebook page, and you can go to our website, teflology-podcast.com. We also have a book available, Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers. So please pick that up if you're interested in doing what we're doing. So thanks for listening to the episode, and it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
I just want to cut in, Matt, can you watch your leg on the table? Because I think it's picking up the microphone. It's picking up on your vibrations.
All right. Yeah, sure.
Good vibrations, but
But stop it.
Not intense. Not for the listeners.